sandwiches, but I passed on the alcohol because my head was already buzzing, and the bubbly wine wasn't doing a thing for my anxiety. The appetizers had just gone into my mouth when I noticed a tall male figure standing beside me. I felt a light touch to my arm.
Katie, are you okay?
I turned and then hastened to swallow. Swallow, Katie, swallow. It was my stepbrother, Ben Blackwood. Honestly, I didn't know him well. In fact, we'd only met a handful of times, most of our encounters recent and involving my father's funeral, but I was relieved to see somebody I knew. I nodded, unable to speak because I had a mouthful of sandwiches to choke down. Ben Blackwood literally took my breath away. Aesthetically, he was so damn perfect. His dark hair and striking hazel eyes that seemed to change from moment to moment mesmerized me. His perfectly ripped body filled out the custom suit he was wearing beautifully. His shoulders and massive chest made me wish we were closer. I'd have that perfect pair of muscular arms to throw myself into so I could sob out the sorrow that was locked inside me.
I know you don't know many of the people here,
he said in a regretful baritone. I finally got the food down and found my voice. That's okay. My father and I weren't exactly close. Not close, like in we never spoke at all. My dad had never been around when I was a kid, and I hadn't seen him at all during college. There were only the text messages he'd started sending me after I'd gone off to college. The only other thing that had been there was the money. But I supposed I had to be grateful that he cared enough to make sure I was okay financially. He hadn't needed to. God knew he'd gotten along just fine by ignoring me for the first 18 years of my life.
I'm really sorry,
Ben said sincerely.
Ian and I weren't close to your father either, but we had a father at one time.
I knew my stepbrothers had loved their dad. Unfortunately, the father they loved had been killed in a car accident almost 6 years ago. Ian Blackwood, my oldest stepbrother, had taken over Blackwood Technologies when his father had died. I had never met Ian, and he hadn't been able to make it home for my father's funeral, but I couldn't help but admire how he'd elevated the company since it had come under his and Ben's leadership. The corporation had still been a computer technology leader when their father had been at the helm. But my stepbrothers had sent the Blackwood name into the stratosphere by picking edgier, savvier projects to develop. Like the robotic surgery project that I'd give anything to be part of. Maybe someday. Ben continued.
Maybe I can find Mom. I know she'd like to be with you.
No, I said emphatically. I'm good. I saw a tray full of glasses pass by, and I had to force myself not to take one. The last thing I wanted was to hang out with my stepmother. She was nice enough, and I knew she meant well, but being with her made me uncomfortable. I was still mourning Mom, even though it had been 4 years now since she died. It felt awkward to be with my father's second wife, even though she'd been nothing but polite to me. Were they happy together? I asked before I could keep the words from flying out of my mouth. Ben gave me a weak smile.
I have no idea. Mom rarely talked about your father. They seemed to do their own thing a lot after about the first 6 months of their marriage.
Ben was hedging. I could see it in his expressive eyes. But I suppose it wasn't good to speak ill of the dead, especially not on the day of his funeral. I nodded, accepting the fact that I was never going to know my father through my stepbrother. More than likely, Ben resented him, and I certainly didn't blame him for that. My dad had been a user, and he'd used their mother's money like he'd earned it himself, which he hadn't. My father had never really worked a day in his life.
How long are you going to be in Florida?
Ben asked gently. I shrugged. I'm not sure. I should go back to Massachusetts for the next few months. I don't have to because I finished my classes last semester, so I'm open. I guess I'm on a job hunt for a programming gig wherever I can find one now.